I think since we have a couple layers of introductions today for this very, very special event, I'm going to welcome everyone to Department of Medicine Grand Rounds this January the 16th, the day after Martin Luther King Day, and send the responsibility for the intros over to Grady and Dr. Darlington Pobey to introduce to start the introductions for our special guest.
Over to you. Oh, okay. Oh, hey, hello, everyone. My name is Darlington Pobey. I am a second-year resident here at Emory, and I am currently the president of the Churchwell Diversity and Inclusion Collective. I'd like to thank everyone for making it out here, either in person or tuning in online to listen to Dr. Churchwell's keynote talk. Just a little about the CDIC. It's a resident-run organization born out of a desire just to create a safe and welcoming environment for internal medicine health staff of diverse backgrounds. The goal and the objective of the CDIC mainly is to foster camaraderie, just champion efforts in advocacy, recruitment and retention, professional development, and service to our community. Today, it is my privilege to introduce a day after Martin Luther King's birthday, our very own Martin Luther Campbell, who like Dr. Churchwell, holds the distinction of being the first lineage presence.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr.
Yeah, I'm going to ask if you guys can mute the ceiling mics so that our sound quality is better.
Oh, sounds good. Can you all hear me okay? Good. All right. So yes, I have the wonderful privilege of introducing Dr. André Churchwell. Just a little bit more about him. So in natively East Nashville, Dr. André Churchwell's contributions stretch far beyond the volunteer state borders. An accomplished physician, advocate, mentor, educator, and artist, he has devoted his life and decades-long career to championing equity and access for all by breaking down barriers in the clinic, the classroom, and the community. André Churchwell has been nationally recognized for his contributions to engineering, medicine, and inclusivity. In 1975, way before I was born, Dr. André Churchwell graduated magna cum laude from Vanderbilt School of Engineering, receiving his medical degree from Harvard Medical School in 1979, and broke through a racial barrier by becoming the first African-American chief medical resident at Grady Memorial Hospital from 1984 to 1985. He later completed his internship, residency, and cardiology fellowship at Emory University School of Medicine, where he was the inaugural Minority Affairs Officer and earned the accolade of Most Outstanding House Officer. Collaborating with colleagues at Emory and Georgia Tech, he worked over several years to develop the Emory, Georgia Technology Research Center, which evolved into the Emory, Georgia Tech Biomedical Engineering Program. In 1991, he returned to his hometown and alma mater and subsequently joined the faculty at Vanderbilt University School of Medicine. There, he has been a professor in a variety of disciplines, including medicine, radiology, biomedical engineering, and cardiology. He previously served as Vanderbilt's Vice Chancellor for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, and Chief Diversity Officer, as well as Vice Chancellor for Outreach, Inclusion, and Belonging. Dr. Churchwell has received numerous accolades in his advancement of diversity and inclusion in the culture and climate of the medical school, medical center, and beyond. All the while, he still practices medicine with his trademark excellence. Consistently over the last decade, he has been named one of the nation's top cardiologists and the best doctors in America. From 2010 to 2013, he was awarded the Professional Research Consultants 5-Star Excellence Award. And in 2014, he was named one of the top 15 most influential African-American health educators by Black Health Magazine. With all of his wonderful accomplishments in mind, he is also known for his sartorial attire, landing him the reputation of being one of the freshest doctors in the world. Okay. Sadly enough, poor Darlington and I have been tasked today with trying to emulate his well-dressed example and falling short, as expected. As the young folks would say, Dr. Churchwell's got that drip. But on a more serious note, one of the things I appreciate most about Dr. Churchwell is his commitment to his family and his devotion to mentorship. I hope you all can appreciate what rarefied air we are in right now and how fortunate we are to have Dr. Churchwell and his better half, Mrs. Doretha Henderson Churchwell, in our presence today. So without further ado, I present to you Dr. André Churchwell.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, thank you. Wow, that was nice. Is this on tape so I can play this later? Watch it? That's great. You know, coming back to Emory and Grady, I have to say them in the same breath, is very much like coming home. Though I may have gone to Harvard Med School and they put me in the womb in terms of my medical education, I was birthed here, baby. I was birthed big time. I don't know what floor it was on, Bill, at the time we were here, but I was birthed here in terms of my training, my aptitude, my clinical judgment, my sense of what it means to be a physician and a physician leader all occurred while walking the halls of Emory Hospital and Grady Hospital and being mentored by a legion of great Emory teachers, clinical teachers, and researchers. So my talk today is reflections on hearing those voices. This talk comes off after a paper I wrote about 10 years ago, submitted to the Texas Heart Institute, called Hearing Voices. Their great medical editor, the great late Herb Fred, when he saw my paper, said, Andre, you know, this is in a psychiatric journal, Hearing Voices. I said, no, not Fred, I'm hearing the voices of my mentors. He said, okay, I'll publish that. So this will be kind of a reflection of that particular article and kind of looking at it in common times. I need to say that I need to acknowledge a lot of folks who have influenced me that are sitting in the room. Mike Lubin is here. Thanks, Mike, for coming. You'll hear more about Bill Ely later, Bill, the Executive Dean for Life here at Emory. But there are a host of other folks. I met this morning Bob Taylor, Chief of Cardiology, great friend and colleague when I was here. Dave Stevens, our Chair of Medicine, who was a great friend and colleague for many years when he was infectious disease attending when I was here, those many years ago. And then a whole host of other people, including the legendary Nanette Winger. You'll hear more about Dr. Winger later. And just, you know, it's one of those opportunities where you don't get a chance to do a medical humanities talks. Usually they ask me to come talk about the latest treatment for hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. Well, we're not going to do that today. We're going to talk about mentoring and mentors and why that's so important in your still young journeys. I want to thank Kim Manning for helping me get here, and Cheryl Herron, the great team of diversity and inclusion leaders that Emory has, and it's been great for me to watch their growth, and looking forward to continuing to be the old man that they can call occasionally when they have questions. So I'm going to start the talk now. So though it is going to be talking about that, the relevance of okay, behave here. Yeah, it's not going to be. I'll do it myself. Whoops. It didn't want to. Oh, just got it. Yeah. So I have to begin though by talking about Churchwell and Emory, because once again, no Emory, no Grady, no career for André Churchwell. But it's more than just that. I will say that this particular crest, the Emory crest that you see on the screen, is a picture of the crest that Bruce Lowe, the legendary Emory leader in cardiology and medicine, gave me when he retired from Crawford Long Hospital after serving Emory for who knows half a century in medicine and cardiology. And you hear more about that. And that sits on my desk and reminds me every day of my connection here. But you have to start with your origin story, right? I don't care if it's Marvel Comics or André Churchwell's life. Their origin story begins with my parents, Robert and Mary. They've gone on to their great rewards. Dad left us in 2009 at 92, and Mom left us in 2020 at 89. But they spent a lot of time preparing my brothers and my sister now to, as Dad said, go solo. So we've been relatively well set to go solo, and you'll hear more about that, I think, as I chronicle my time here at Emory and Grady. But I have to acknowledge them for sure, because we all stand on the shoulders of giants. Whether it's Newton at the Royal Society getting his award about gravity and the apple hitting Bill Ely in his head, or whether it's or me talking about my parents, I stand on their shoulders because I can see further and reach higher and do more. And I'm sure all of you feel very, very much the same about your parents and those folks. Our origin story has to have a home. This is our home on 707 North 9th Street in Nashville, Tennessee, built in 1956 for about $2,000, Bill. And Dad paid cash for that. People now come and knock on the door, and what do you think, given the housing market in Atlanta and Nashville, over $500,000. Now they're looking to tear it down and build some monstrosity, so they'll never get the house because we will keep it. My sister currently lives there since my parents have left. And it, to some extent, is a shrine for the family because we can return there. And there are a number of things there that keep us on track, as mom and dad would want us to. One of which was dad's den. The largest room in the house and the only room with air conditioning in the wall was dad's den, his library. It was about 400 square feet out of that 2,000 square feet, all with intent and purpose. There's a word called living a model life that Willis Hurst lived and Ken Walker lived and my dad lived, and you'll hear that word used. He wanted us to see how we should build our lives and what we should value. So in his den on the wall was what he called the Wall of Fame, Andre, and you have to do something significant for me to put something up there. So you'll see there, I think my medical school class picture, my uncle's picture when he finished Fisk University in 1938 by being an elevator boy in the Tennessee Hotel, put himself through Fisk, okay? Okay, how about that one, guys and ladies? And then my brother, that's 1938 there. There's Uncle Ross's picture from Fisk. And then my brother's graduation pictures and some other significant things that dad that accrued to him in his career. That's when he was at the National Banner. He's a reporter and he was interviewing said heavyweight champion of the world, Muhammad Ali, right there. And so when I came to Grady, I said, that's got to be significant for dad. I said, would it rate if we get pictures made you could put on the wall? He said, yeah, that'll be fine. So we went to the basement of Grady. I got the guy who used to take pictures down there. But I brought I was, I think, a first-year cardiology fellow when this was done. And my brothers were interns. Keith was an intern here at Grady. And his twin, Kevin, was an intern at Boston Children's Hospital. He chose the wrong career. And so, but man, check out the size of those glasses, man. That's back in the early 80s. You got flying saucers for glasses back in those days. And so dad he really liked this. And this was something he talked about all the time. And he'd bring his friends back there and show this off. And so this was a challenge for him that he offered to us as he tried to model another life. Another great person who lived a model life was J. Willis Hurst. Many of you do not or had not met Dr. Hurst, but I recommend you spend time finding this book and reading it. This is his life story written by Mark Silverman, a great cardiology teacher here, and Bruce Fry, Dr. Hurst's buddy, who was the chair of medicine at one time at Mayo Clinic. But Hurst lived a model life in the sense that he thought it was really important for him to live out examples of what he wanted us to live up to, whether it be the kind of car to buy or the kind of stethoscope to purchase, or Andre, why I get up in the morning at 4 o'clock in the morning to start working on the heart, because that's the best time for me to think. It's where my creativity is. When is your best time, Andre, for creativity and the great flow of ideas that can come? Is it 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning? Is it 11 o'clock at night? Is it sitting in this chair? Or is it, for me, it turns out and everybody needs to find their creative moment or creative place. Different for everybody. Some folks are jogging. For me, it's 11 o'clock in the shower, listening to Frank Sinatra. Can't beat that one, baby. My wife put a stereo system in there so I can listen to Francis on the Sirius station, so XM Sirius. So you got to find something or that sort of circumstances or that place where you're more creative. And that was another lesson Willis gave, but there are more lessons to come from that. There are other Churchwells that have been here. One of the things Willis brought to my attention, he said, Andre, there was a Churchwell here in the early 60s. Greg Churchwell. Did you know him? And I didn't know him, but when I was putting this talk together a few years ago, I actually did the research. And in fact, there was a Greg Churchwell from Savannah, Tennessee, which is like southwest part of the state near Clifton, Tennessee, where my family's origin story was. An Irish Scotch settler named John Churchwell. Most people who owned enslaved Africans were not rich. They were dirt farmers. And they needed enslaved Africans to help them do their work on their farm. And he had 7 enslaved Africans, all named after his name, Churchwell, and 2 were married, a guy and a young lady, and they got married and they birthed Isom Churchwell, my great-great-grandfather, who began our story. But Greg's Churchwell, Greg was someplace in that Churchwell mix. I don't know if he was a cousin, but that's all within about 10, 20 miles of each other. But this guy, look at the history. There must be something about genetic material. I don't know. But look at that. Vanderbilt, Harvard Med School. And this cat finished Grady in his residency and went up to University of Michigan and did a pulmonary fellowship, then came back to do a cardiology fellowship. Had planned to stay on the faculty in academic medicine, but his father became ill in Savannah. So he moved back to Savannah and started a practice and stayed there and lived in Savannah delivering. I looked it up, just, studied it very carefully, amazing care. I never got a chance to meet him. But I did get a chance to meet his daughter, Mary Ashley Churchwell, because as chief resident at Grady, you were part of, I don't know, where's our chief resident here? Yeah, you are a chief residence here. You are involved in choosing the next set of interns. So little Mary Churchwell's name popped up on that register you get from the residency programs, and I said, there's no way in hell we're not going to take Mary Ashley Churchwell here at Vanderbilt and at Emory. And so she was doing a one-year internship, rotating internship to become a dermatologist. She had a dermatology residency at University of Tennessee. So she became my little sister, and I looked after her entire internship year. Mary Ashley went on to found a practice in Germantown, Tennessee, right outside Memphis, with her sister Lou Churchwell, and we kept in touch for years. And she passed away from early Alzheimer's, kind of occipital lobe Alzheimer's, Bill, that robbed her of her vision first. Terrible. And but one is interesting story. Bill Ely and I go back to Bill was a third-year student, and he and I were wearing this very same outfit that Greg is wearing, our whites, when we went to see Wynton Marsalis as a night after call with no sleep. When Wynton Marsalis came to Atlanta for the first time. So we're sitting there in all whites. Maybe that's why they put us down in the front row. Maybe they thought we were going to be the people to take care of somebody who passes out. But you were able to wear your all whites at one time here. And so that's part of the beginning of the story. The other thing I want to make a case about is and why it's important to study the history of your training program and look at those who came before you, because J. Willis Hurst's name is on your residency training program, but I would strongly recommend you study him because you will be a better person and doctor for it. One of the things Dr. Hurst had on his desk that I have in my desk at home, and I have on my desk in my office, at my administrative office, and it's on my medical desk, is this particular valedictory address by Elbert Tuttle Sr., who gave this address to the Emory Law School back in 1957 about what it meant to be a professional. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it so resonates with me, and Dr. Hurst just inculcated this into us, saying in a very real sense, his or her professional service cannot be separate from their professional being. He has no goods to sell, no land to till, and his is collective, I might add. His only asset is himself. It turns out that there is no right price for service. But what is a share of a man or woman worth? Does not contain the quality of integrity, then you're worthless, right? Think about that. And if you do, then you're priceless. The value is either nothing or infinite. It's connected to integrity, it's infinite. So this is what I look at probably, I don't know, 2 or 3 times a week. I read this as a way to push me along in these challenging times, both that are occurring out in the world and also with respect to our medical practice too. And then, of course, the Emory House staff, when I was chief resident, you still take these pictures. I saw this picture outside the Emory Medicine office at the hospital there. I only point this out as we have a large training program, still large too, I might add. And we still have occasionally people who dress so terribly, they stand out so much. Here's the senior resident, Mark Glazer, who was in my group, and he wore this plaid ugly jacket just so people could pick him out of the crowd. So I don't know who the Mark Glazer is in your residency program, but don't let him wear a plaid jacket to the house staff picture, please. The other value of being here at Grady and Emory is that you meet people. I met my wife in the Grady emergency room when it was dark and quiet and dank and romantic. In the back of the Grady emergency room in 1982 of a vomiting patient, I think that's right, honey, I had the foresight to realize, holy smoke, lightning bolt has struck me finally, and I have met my partner and mate and best friend for the next 41 years. And that's exactly what happened. So amazingly good things can happen. The other thing can happen when you're early young attending, you're broke. Okay, at least you didn't have any money back then and now. And so to get married, she paid for most of all of the wedding material out of her Grady nurse sale. I think I'm making $18,000 a year, guys. So I can't help too much. And then the other thing is that you're allowed to use the Emory churches, the chapels, That's important to remember if you get married down here. So we got married in Cannon Chapel, buddy. We had the whole ceremony there. Not have to pay for anything, Mike. So we're down there. I did wear this very ugly morning dress. I would never be caught dead in that now, but that's another story. And then my brother Kevin, who was broke, as my brother said, a #2 broken pencil when he was finishing his residency at Boston Children's. He met and fell in love with Gloria Respers and wanted to get married, but was broke, came down here. We used the Little Glen Church. How about that? Churchwell's getting married all over the place at Emory, and his dad and mom, they're so proud and happy. Here's Keith. You're going to see him in March. He comes back to give a medical grand rounds here. He'll be president of the American Heart Association this year, the 100th year anniversary. Little brother, he didn't do too badly. And then his twin brother, Kevin, is Boston and CEO of Boston Children's Hospital. Went to the wrong med school, Vandy, trained in the wrong place, Boston Children's, but that's another story. But he's, and then mom and my sister and my older brother, Robert, who's a principal. These are teachers here in Nashville. He's a vice principal. And then yours truly, who had a lot more hair back then, for sure. Let's see, there we go. And then we have also Keith, who met his wife, who was his intern. So man, this stuff can happen. You could be smitten all over the place here. So he was taking care of his intern at the VA. You had one intern, was Leslie Douglas. And she was a student from, med student from University of Pittsburgh, and she was an intern here, and he was her resident. And man, I was asking him, why are you doing all the blood cultures? You're doing all the workups. What's this about? You got to train her. He said, I'm going to marry this woman, man. I said, okay. She still got to know how to do her workups. So they were married here, and they have this lovely daughter, Lauren. And the other thing while here, this gives you a sense of kind of what Grady looked like and what it was like to be here. And I'm teeing you up to hear my mentors in the next part of this talk, but you really have to understand this is kind of the background story you need to appreciate. So the year I was chief resident, the very first year they had a Black chief resident, they named and followed me around for the Grady yearly report, Fulton County report. And there's that much younger looking guy there. And that's coming through the front door of the Grady Hospital as it was. I see there's something there in the front, right across the street from the Glenn building. But that was the front door. That's about 6 o'clock in the morning. And I've got my same briefcase I still have, but not as much hair. And then we go up to do morning report, right, at the chief resident's office at Grady. And we have that coffee that will wake the dead that the Grady kitchen brought up. Lord knows what else was in there. And we have all the residents gathering, drinking coffee and eating Grady donuts as we prepare to do morning report. And one of the residents is trying to show me this EKG that he made a cool diagnosis with. But during the course of the day, you'd go to the Grady MEC, that dark place that's not there anymore. I think it's an administrative hallway now, which I found amazing, to be honest with you, because of the number of people who passed away in some of those front rooms, in those code rooms. I went in one time and there's a lady in there typing in this room with a cabinet, a file cabinet. I thought it was almost sacrilege. I almost felt like grabbing her and said, ma'am, I need to move you out of this room, because hundreds of people have either been saved or passed away in that room one in the front. So I'm down there with Mark Cornfield, my teaching resident, and we're reviewing the book for the day. And this is an unheard of thing. The chief resident in surgery was down there. Lord knows why he was in the grade. This is when the MEC and the SAC were separate. Okay, so this is the MEC. And we're down there reviewing the book and trying to see who should be admitted. Mentioned earlier by my Martin is that I was involved in that Emory Georgia Tech Biotechnology Center. And this was the important Emory Medicine magazine to begin to talk about that center. This is Joel Fellner. You all know Joe just retired, at Ajit Yoganathan, one of our great applied engineers for valve flow and valve studies. He and Joel worked together. And along the way, I met Don Gittins, the chair of aerospace engineering, and worked on coronary fluid mechanics there for about 5 or 6 years. That's one of our models there, the LAD, modeling flow, looking at where early atherosclerosis might begin based on fluid mechanics properties of flow. And so, but along the way, had great tutelage from Don Gittins and Ajit Yoganathan and Bob Nerum and Charlie Hatcher here on the Emory side, and Robert Guyton, as we put together the beginnings of the Emory Georgia Tech Biotechnology Center. That was a really important time in my life. Well, I had so much energy then. As Kim Manning says, Dr. Hurd, you have energy. She meant, well, along with running a research lab at Georgia Tech across the interstate, I was asked to be the first minority affairs director because I'd done this work as a chief resident, right? So I'm there with Laura Mitchell up on the second floor of the WSCAB building, and we're doing some key stuff. We're connecting with Morehouse College for the first time in the history of Emory's Med School. We had a relationship with Morehouse. We started getting some of the top scholars from Morehouse and Spelman to actually start attending Emory Med School, and that was one of my great accomplishments at that time, and also beginning to help our med school admissions committee begin to understand the value and importance of inclusive excellence practices as we try to pick the class that'll bring that will do the most to change the course of health equity. Okay, and so that was really an important time. I did that for 4 or 5 years, and my dad gave his manuscripts to Emory. He didn't just give them. Emory calls somebody from the Emory library, says, you're retiring, Mr. Churchwell. My dad was the first African-American to write on a newspaper in the Southeast, the Nashville Banner. This is 1950, right after World War II. He finished Fisk University in the GI Bill and met my mom there. But he wrote for 30, 40 years for the Nashville Banner, covering all kinds of stories, initially inhibited by the racist treatment and practices of the publisher of that paper, who was fulminant racist. I don't know, Dad chose to work because this guy wanted to get the money from the Black community. So he hired a Black journalist. It wasn't he had any real connections to the improvement of race relations in Nashville, but Dad had 3 knucklehead kids he had to feed, and he loved writing. So this was a chance for him to do that. He did it so well, he's now in the Smithsonian Museum. And you go to Washington, D.C., to the African American Museum, go to the press section, and there's a whole section devoted to my dad, the Jackie Robinson of Southern journalism, they called him. Well, he was so noted, Woodruff Library people, manuscript called, and he gave them all of his manuscripts. And I said, why didn't you give it to Vanderbilt, my goodness, or Fisk? Because Emory asked, Andre. If someone asks, that's when you act on it. So they asked for his, and so if you ever want to go and read some of his stuff, that's where it is. And that's where it is in the Emory, that's what it looks like in the Emory Woodruff Library rare archive section. There was an event that Emory put on, thankfully, for this down in the WSCAP, because there's that bust of Robert Woodruff there, Kim, right there that we're standing in front of. And there's Dr. Hurst, and there's Penny Yergin, our secretary for the Department of Medicine for 1,000,000 years. And there's little brother Keith. So another great example. And then I was fortunate to win and be honored with a Distinguished Resident Alumni Award that's not given very often here at Emory. That was in 2004. And it was I was so honored because I got it from Dr. Hurst and Dr. Logue, my great mentors. But I want you to pay attention. There's Dr. Winger there with her late husband, Julius. And right between there, as he always would be so close to Dr. Hurst in training, is Doug Morris, who used to be the head of Emory Clinic and the head of Crawford Law and Cardiology, who modeled his entire career after this legendary cardiologist. And Doug had a legendary career too. This is Andy Towsey, one of the cardiology fellows who was going bald. I just wanted to show his picture. Okay. And so we have, Emory trains a lot of cardiologists. And the thing I point out here is that a lot of us came to Vanderbilt as I came home and my brother Keith came home. A number of other guys that trained with us, like Rob Hood, my intern here in 1980, did his cardiology fellowship, and he joined us at Vanderbilt. And Mark Glazer, he's hiding behind that bad plaid coat, joined us here also at Vandy. And Mark Stankiewicz, who did his training here in residency and cardiology, joined us at Vanderbilt. And so that was key. And now we'll jump into the mentoring part. So there's a Texas Heart, part of the Texas Heart Journal is a whole section on Peabody's Corner. That's a medical humanities. I don't want any of the older folks raising their hand, but who here as residents or students know who Francis Peabody is? A minute, raise your hand if you know who Francis Peabody is. Okay, Bill, you can't raise your hand. Oh, here's a trainee. Yes, can you stand up and tell us? Who was Francis Peabody? Oh, you're thinking about the hotel. No, this guy, it was head of the Thorndike Lab at Harvard Med School and one of the seminal teachers of medical education in the early part of the 20th century. And basically contracted esophageal gastric cancer from the studies he was doing on himself, as people did a lot of self-experimentation infect them with radium and radioactive elements and got cancer. And as he was dying, he wrote a couple of really seminal papers you should read in JAMA. One is The Care of the Patient, and one is The Soul of the Clinic. So you ought to get those, Mark, get those together, and your colleague, your chief resident, and disseminate those. That's the paper where the phrase is, what's the secret in caring for the patient? Is to care for the patient. That's where that line came from. So I would really recommend everybody here go and read those papers. And so I wrote this piece about people mentoring me, and this is part of what I wrote. This is the final paragraph. I said, although perfection cannot be fully achieved, striving for the unreachable can make us better human beings and better physicians. Mentors play a key role in this life journey and oftentimes serve as road signs to direct us. I hope that our younger colleagues will understand this principle and spend their lives developing a listening ear in order to hear the voices of their mentors. You want to hear your great mentors tell you when you're going off the rails. So you need to kind of foster and develop that whole idea of developing that type of relationship with people who can really help you along the way. So I had a number of mentors and coaches. I had a life coach, my dad, which I talked about some, who inculcated me on how to be a man, how to be a father, how to be a forthright citizen in this country, what it means to be connected to diversity and inclusion in a way that you can pull other people up as you go up the ladder, Andre. You need to reach down and pull others up who are struggling as you did, because you're now up a little bit further. And so that was that. And then we had administrative leaders, the great John Stone, who was director of admissions here for years, the poet laureate. You need to read about John Stone if you don't know him. Really helped me understand how to be an admissions leader and how to do that effectively. And Dan Fetterman, who was executive dean at Harvard Med School and chair of medicine at Mass General and chair of medicine at Stanford for many years, was my go-to guy for these really tough administrative jobs that I had taken over the years. Should I take the job? How should I structure the job? So you need to have people that you can either, you guys have this social media stuff. Don't do X. It sounds like don't do X, but find some way to do social media and connect with people. I just pick up the phone and call these guys, and a number of them have gone on to their great rewards, but they were phenomenal. Dad, had so many great ideas and inculcated them. One of the things he pointed out to us, me, is that during the summers in Nashville, he said, you're going back to Vanderbilt, you got to help me pay tuition. You either can cut all the yards in the neighborhood and make $300, or you can sit in this air-conditioned room in the den and read these books I'm going to give you for $300. I'll read the books. And the books were initially the definitive volume, the life biography of Sigmund Freud by Ernest Jones, that our buddy Ken Walker had read too. I found out when I was an intern here. And he also had me read the definitive biography of Ernest Hemingway, and then all of Ernest Hemingway's major novels, and write reports that just flowed with red ink as he was correcting my grammar. I mean, my papers, I sent him every paper I wrote, medicine, scientific, medical humanities, until I was about 35 or 40. And at age 40, he finally said, you don't need to send anymore. You finally know how to write. Boy, he was tough, but that's what you want. And so he was such a noted hero in Nashville that they tore down a junior high school that was in Black Nashville, North Nashville, called Wharton, that had been built in the early part of the 20th century and named after a Confederate general, and placed that in the Black neighborhood. How about that one? Well, someone that had the right stuff as president of the school system there tore that building down and built this building and named it after a hero of North Nashville, Black, and it was my dad. And so this is Dad. And so in the school, they have a number of the things he would tell us, either he read and would share with us, or his own ideas. They have those scattered on all the walls throughout the school. And so that's the kind of teacher he was. John, I mentioned, just a phenomenal teacher. His son, Johnny Stone, is the head of outpatient rheumatology at Mass General. But John, the students here know John Stone? Have they read his book? There's a book to have called On Doctoring that John put together with Robert Coles from Yale, that every med student was given by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation for over a decade or so. Yeah, so they need to read John Stone and read that book, and read John Stone's first book of poetry, The Smell of Matches. How about that title? And so, amazing teacher. And of course, Dan Fetterman, I mentioned. When one of my great mentors, Levi Watkins, passed, Levi Watkins was the Hamilton Holmes of Vanderbilt. Ham Holmes was the first Black med student to finish Emory Med School. I knew Ham Holmes, good man. But around that time in 1966, Levi Watkins was accepted into Vandy Med School, the first Black student into Vandy Med School. He had just finished Tennessee State University, the state African-American HBCU there in Nashville. And Levi came in and just put the school on his head because it was absolutely brilliant. Finished near the top of the class, AOA, went off to Hopkins, had this storied career as a cardiac surgeon there, implanted the first automatic defibrillator. His name's on the article on the front page of the New England Journal in 1980 with Dr. Morawski. But a number of other things Levi did, but he was a great mentor, and he died while he was actually mentoring or actually interviewing cardiac surgery fellows. He died, had a heart attack and died. So I wrote about mentors and how the role they said. I said, if this thing will follow me here, education of Alexander the Great was entrusted to a leader of immense skill and wisdom. His name was Aristotle. Though the name mentor is derived from Greek mythology, it was Aristotle's role as Alexander the Great's mentor that defined the word. From the origin, mentor has forever been associated with a personal teacher, an intellectual role model, and a mentoring friend. I recently lost a great friend, Levi Watkins, a man who committed himself to several noble efforts: the civil rights of the downtrodden, developing the lives and careers of young minority physicians in academic medicine, and serving as an oracle on the struggle for equal rights for Black people in America. His life was like a bottle of cherished wine, savored and meaningful until the last drop, which is the way you want your lives to be. Okay? Okay, that's a coda. The last drop. He, like many men of destiny, was on a life path to make a difference until the last moments of his life. Such was the case as Dr. Watkins was mentoring medical students for fellowship when death suddenly claimed him. Fortune afforded me the chance to meet this guy. I'm not going to get into all the details of that, but I think it's good mentoring has such a pivotal role in the growth of a career-minded person. One of the challenges that we see of the Black single parent family is the lack of a parent mentor guide sometimes. It is for this reason successful programs that address in the kindergarten through career arc of African-American males maintain a demanding but loving mentorship all the way to college and in some cases beyond. That's why programs like 100 Black Men, 100 Black Women have such a positive effect on the careers of young African-American students. My contention is that to address our large STEM problem in public education, such lifelong mentoring will be essential and must not be minimized or neglected. And a few years ago, I wrote about this. And this was published in our local paper, the Tennessean. And I ended by saying, let's hope that as we invest as effective mentors in our students, that their influence will aid them in conquering the great problems of science, health, and other societal ills down the road. So that's why it's important to be a mentor, and our chief residents are serving in that role, preparing you guys to do that. The clinical mentors were many, and many are from the Emory Pantheon, and they begin with Willis Hurst, who correlated everything. You guys are reaching for high tech when Dr. Hurst would always say, know the low tech well first. What can you derive from the history, the physical exam, and the EKG and basic labs and chest x-ray before you move on to ordering more expensive and particularly invasive and dangerous tests? So he inculcated those kind of lessons in our minds, and it took hard work because you'd have to sit down and do the work on correlating the history and physical exam with that EKG, and then following that patient all the way through the hospital course to see exactly what happened, and then building a whole reservoir of patients like that up as you began your career path to becoming a real clinician. Because Hurst was right, being a really great clinician, if you do that kind of work, is as onerous and as hard as any research career path could be. Bruce Lowe, make up your mind. I'll talk about that. This is the guy that taught me, don't be dwindling around. You got to be a treating doctor, Andre. So you got to move fast, make up your mind, and move on. Patients will get ill while you're sitting there twiddling your thumbs. And then Ed Dorney came from Brooklyn and Kings County Hospital, recruited by Bruce Lowe, a Yankee down here, who was a B-29 bomber in World War II that came to here as a cardiologist that also kind of mimicked or supported that particular idea that Dr. Logue had. And every time I hear I'm having a problem trying to figure out what to do, Dorney says, what is your gut? What does your experience tell you? And Joe Hardison, who's still around, would always, I could hear him after morning report of the VA, he would keep you going off the rail by saying, Andre, what'd you do that for? So you get ready to tell Dr. Say, okay, Dr. Hardison, here's what I think is going on, and we're gonna do these tests. Andre, what you gonna do that for? And you stop and think, maybe I don't need to do that. Yeah. And one time he said, you know, if you take a little bit better history, you'll figure things out. So I had a patient that came in with granulomatous hepatitis, fever of unknown origin. This is a gentleman, a veteran in his 30s. And I couldn't figure it out. The night I was on call, I went through all the books. I went through Harrison, and I assumed he may have tuberculosis, but I wasn't sure. So Hardison comes in. Okay, Andre, what do you think this guy's got? I said, well, I think he has granulomatous hepatitis. He said, that's only part of the answer. Well, what's the cause? I said, I'm not sure. We got a PPD. You don't need a PPD. What's this man do for a living? I said, well, we talked to him. You didn't talk to him enough. Sir, tell this young man what he had been in early in the morning and seen these patients. Well, I'm a meat cutter in the Piggly Wiggly, and I cut my finger on a bad piece of meat that actually the pig had brucellosis. The guy knew the diagnosis. I'm sitting there all night long wondering, so it's brucellosis sui that had caused granulomatous hepatitis, spread to lymph node adenopathy, elevated alk phos, total bilirubin just minimally elevated, right? You knew that. SGOT not as high in proportion as the alk phos, bilirubin minimally up because it's not extrahepatic obstruction where the bilirubin is really high, right? And you turn yellow. You don't turn yellow with granulomatous. You knew that. And so, but man, that's 40 years ago. You hear me citing this, don't you? Okay. Joe, you're out there? I know you are. Okay. And then, of course, I'll talk about Roma DeSanctis in a little bit. Another Hearst, the Hearst of the East Coast, I would call him. And Dr. Winger's black felt pen. If you're a cardiology fellow, you learn to read EKGs because she would overread your EKGs with that black felt pen. And man, that was as bad as daddy's red ink. But you learn how to read EKGs, and we had the highest pass rates for, there's a section in the cardiology boards just on EKGs. And man, we nailed it. We nailed it because of Dr. Winger. No question about it. Thank you, Dr. Winger. And then John William Ely, even your mentees can become your mentors. You can learn from everyone, okay, along the way. And so Bill's work as an executive dean, he and I've shared so many stories about his challenges, and I've learned from his challenges as he's tried this path for about over a quarter of a century or more, Bill. So I thank you for that, for sharing. I don't say it again, we'll start crying. Two old men start crying in here, that'd be real bad. Dr. Hurst would have EKG rounds for the students. You have to find all the EKGs, find the patients, and that's him there. He's in great spirit. But one of the things I strongly recommend you guys do is create your own heuristics, your own heuristic models for how to look at stuff. Who knows what a heuristic model is? Y'all don't know Francis Peabody. Do y'all know about heuristic models? Come on. Oh, you do? Mental shortcut of your own choosing that is grounded in what you know at the moment and what your experiences tell you. So it's a way for you to make decisions on the fly or on the run or even slower, but it's a way you make decisions. Think about how you make decisions. There is a system to it. So you need to analyze it. Well, this is what I took from Dr. Hurst and made it my own heuristic. Steve Martin, he may have had 2 brains, but I think you need 3 brains to make decisions. What you know by reading, what you do if it's your family member, and thirdly, what your experience tells you. It's your failures you learn most from. Day 4 of internship, Grady Hospital, young Dr. Churchwell admits a 80-year-old African-American woman with an hematocrit of 20, with an MCV of 68. And no history in the hospital of guaiac positive, but it sounds like probably at home she may have been having melon intermittently for months. Because she walks in with a blood pressure of 120 over 80. You don't, if you hemorrhage down to a hematocrit of 20, does your blood pressure, you can walk in with a blood pressure of 120 over 80? No. Good answer. So that's a chronically evolved iron deficiency anemia. So how do you treat that? Well, you draw the iron studies and you start doing the workup, but she was in heart failure. So I had been dutifully studying this with my resident at night, and we ordered transfusions for her that night. Okay, in a slow, delicate way. But this is where we didn't have IVACs. Had those little devices you'd put on the IVs and dial-a-flow. Remember that one? It was a little clamp that had a little marker on it that you could dial it and give you a CC rate. Well, sometime in the middle of the night, that dial-a-flow came off, and she received a whole unit of blood, like in a matter of minutes. She went in a circulatory overload and arrested and died. I come in the next morning, bright and bushy-tailed, I've already read about it all night. I'm ready to go, and I go to her room, and the bed is empty. She had died that night. Okay, do the report, tell Ken Walker, Andre, go down and find out about this. Spend the entire day down in the morgue. Her body's there, me sitting there, looking at her, going through all the papers I can rifle through from the Glenn Library's library. I go over with my Xerox card and use up the entire resident Xerox card on articles on cardiovascular system and anemia. Okay? And I understand what happened. I understand the management. I understand the pathophysiology. I become an expert on cardiovascular system and anemia. Even today, I still give the talks for the residents. I look, every year I go through the Federation proceedings, what's new in anemia in the cardiovascular system. That never happened again. So you learn, unfortunately, to some extent, most from your failures. And that's what you're here to learn from success and learn from failures, that it never happens again, and how it can inform your education to your colleagues and your students. So another heuristic, as I was teaching residents and students at Vanderbilt, I put this together. So how do you make decisions real time? And she was talking about that, real time, on the run. Well, you use those three brains I talked about. You throw in the goal humanism stuff, you throw in the golden rule, and you intersect it with Dr. Hurst's comment on knowing and caring in equal amounts. Okay, we'll get to that. But what drives the other side of your behavior to be sustained in that career for that long? What sustains you? Is it the inner satisfaction of serving mankind? It has a certain gain factor attached to it. Is it the financial reward? That won't sustain a career of 30 years and 40 years or 45 years. Is it a human-human connection? I hope so. What is that gain factor? Is it the application of evidence-based information to make decisions? I hope that also stimulates you to keep going. The intellectual exercise in and of itself should be a stimulant to keep you on the road of your job of being a doc. And then some people love uncertainty management, which is a lot of what you do all the time. The Heisenberg's principle of uncertainty lives within every decision you're making, because you don't have all the information when you make it. And then lastly, you've got to know about task prioritization. So that confluence should be, at least for me, helps me as I try to make decisions that are thoughtful and reflective of patients, balancing knowing and caring in equal amounts. If you know the right answer, but you don't care about the patient, that's immoral. If you don't read about the patient and you care about them, that's bankrupt. That's morally bankrupt, and that's against, I think, moral law too. So you have to care and know and commit yourself in your lifetime to do that equally. Here's a picture of Ken Walker. He's one of the other role models of mine. This is Ken gave me this slide a number of years back. This part of the talk I'm going to give you. He said, "I want you to show this slide." I was skinnier then. He didn't want me to show the slide that he actually what he looked like. It was pretty heavy, so he wanted me to show this. Andre, show this slide. And he's chief resident there, deputy medicine. But what does it mean if you know and care and you're so patient-centric that your patient spends almost a lifetime trying to find you because you saved their life? Ken sent this to me, March 2016. He sent this to me because some guy says, some guy tracks him down. Were you a doctor at the U.S. Air Force Base in the Philippines? I'm gonna cut quickly to it. And Ken says, yeah, I was there. He said, I thank you for saving my life 50 years ago. I said, what? Dear God, I was at Clark Air Force Base. I must have been the one, December 1965. What did you have? I'll simplify. He was out in the field in Vietnam, injured, got phlebitis, and was admitted to the base hospital with pneumonia. They kept tapping his lung, getting this transudate off, giving him antibiotics. He didn't get better. They sent him to the Philippines where Ken was in charge of this medical corps. And immediately his Grady experience kicked in immediately. And Ken said, that's a pulmonary embolism. No testing, put the guy on heparin. There's no test. You're out in the middle of the boonies. So you got to make a diagnosis. You got to make decisions under uncertainty and without technology, which I love the fact because it drives you to become a better thinker. Saved the guy's life. He says, I'm 72. I was 42 then. And he tracks Ken down because he had another pulmonary embolism a few months before this happened. And he had to convince the doctors in the local ER, that's what it is. He probably had thrombophilia. And, now we would be looking for, protein C and protein S's and antithrombin 3s and factor V Leidens and what else over there, guys? Y'all know more about this than I do. But you would be doing that. But the point is, if I go back, the point is Ken took care of this guy in such a way, he remembered and searched him out for almost half a century. Okay? That's what you want somebody to write a letter about you. Okay? You want somebody to send an email to you about that. And then, of course, Dr. Winger, I talked about her. I just wanted you to see their pictures. And Bill, you look the same here. Here you go. Willis, one of the things about him that was really unusual, he wrote letters. You get letters in the mail? So he was supposed to come up and give a talk at Emory, and he got pneumonia or bronchitis. And he was apologizing to me because I was putting that together in Nashville. But here's how he ends every letter. It's a teaching point. And I'm 99 years old when he sent this to me now. I mean, I've been in practice, forever. He says, I suppose all you know by now, André, doesn't have André there, but André, is all it takes to be a good doctor is be kind, thoughtful, and responsive to your patients and study for at least 7 hours a week. He didn't say 10 hours. He didn't say 20 hours. He didn't say 30 hours. Why did he say 7 hours? It's achievable. You can commit yourself to do that in a busy residency, right? 1 hour before you go to bed. Read about a tough case. Brilliance. Brilliance beyond compare. When he sent me a copy of that book that Silverman wrote, André, I was feeling great, one of the best. Then down there, remember, things put aside tend to remain aside. You're working on something important, either a patient issue or publication, stay on it. Stay on it. And we had him come up to, he was getting myasthenia. We think he had myasthenia. Couldn't travel. But I called him up and he came up in an Emory van. They brought him up by Emory and they drove him up to Nashville for a medical, for a presentation for the division of cardiology that I put together. And here's what he sent me. He told me I'm sending you reprints and all that. But here's the punchline again. Always the last letter. So, André, this may be the last visiting professor trip I make, so it means a lot to me. So, punchline, don't screw it up. Okay, so man, you can believe I'm sweating. It's like I'm chief resident all over again. I'm sweating bullets. I'm working my tail off. Keith and I and everybody getting ready for him, being sure we got all the cases, the EKGs. And so when he came, this is in our conference room in cardiology. This is, so along with being feared, he is loved deeply as a surrogate father. So you had these two guys come down from the University of Louisville. They're cardiologists on the faculty. They're Wayne Schubel, chief resident in the mid-'80s, and Henry Sadler, chief resident Grady in the mid to late '80s. There's Glazer again. He's not wearing that black coat. Torrey Slovis was the chief of emergency medicine here for years and came to Vandy and did that for his career. And here's Corey's wife, who was a resident under me when I was chief resident. Keith's wife is Keith, and John Thompson's wife. What's her name? Gail? Gail Thompson. She was one of her first nurses that worked with him. She was living in Nashville now. And there's Rob and there's Stankiewicz. And Keith Rim came with Corey from Grady, and he helped run the emergency room here and there. But we're all there as he's just knocking it. He's sitting there. He began to talk. I'm going to move real quick here by saying, I want to thank, before I begin any cases, I want to thank Vanderbilt for Emory. Everybody going, what? And even I was going, where's Dr. Hurst going with that? Little do you know, maybe you don't know, that Vanderbilt was started by the Methodist Church of Bishop McIntyre. He starts giving the story that met with the Cornelius Vanderbilt, the railroad magnate in New York and convinced him to give $1 million to found this university that would bridge the Civil War between the center parts of the country and the north and east. Well, it was connected to the Methodist Church, but then y'all got, something happened there. He started laughing. And it turned out Asa Chandler heard that you all had fallen away from the Methodist Church. Asa Chandler with Coca-Cola money went up and told, told the folks that we'll build a school down here at Emory and it'll be connected to the Methodist Church forever. So the Methodist Church moved their connection permanently from Vanderbilt to, so I thank you again, as he said. Everybody was stood up and started applauding. So this is the letter he wrote after he left and came back, and I won't read everything, but my visit there, maybe my last trip, and I think it was one of his last, I'll be overwhelmed by your kindness, but he thanks everybody. One little footnote here is that he was getting cases, fresh cases off the wards. We're bringing him things happening right there. We brought a case, Keith brought down a case of an 80-year-old lady with ovarian cancer who had undergone hysterectomy and ovarectomy and went into flash pulmonary edema, had to be intubated and placed in our coronary unit. And he presented the case to Dr. Hurst, and he showed Dr. Hurst the EKG. Dr. Hurst looked up, smiled at him, scribbled the diagnosis on the EKG and folded it up, said, Keith, show that to me later when you get some more information. Share that diagnosis. Everybody's going like, what? Once again, they're always going, what? And so the day ends, and so Keith runs back down before he leaves. Dr. Hurst, this lady has normal coronary artery catheter, but she's got this thing that we just described called Takotsubo. Takotsubo on our ventriculogram, that's stress cardiomyopathy, okay, where the apical ballooning syndrome. Well, Keith opened it up. Keith, what do I have in there? He opened it up. Back in the 40s, it was called catecholamine-induced cardiomyopathy. Picked up a subtle T-wave change in lead V1 through V3 that he had seen and correlated with hundreds of cases, okay? Man was amazing. To the end, so he wrote a piece in the Francis Peabody, in the Peabody column, and this basically says he's 90 years old. They were bringing, you guys would go to Wesley Woods once a week to do morning report with him. Lucky residents, Emory residents. But the thing he was kind of concerned about was that there were a lot of issues around ethics, medical ethics, and other things that they brought up that were problematic. And he said, we need Francis Peabody to talk to you. And then I'm going to end by just a couple of things. Logue, how do you learn from people? Learn from everybody. Logue had a photographic memory, not a deductive memory. He remembered every case. So in his brain, a virtual hospital of each patient, their EKG, their pathology, their cath, their autopsy. And he would just say, Andre, that lady reminds me of Miss Jones. I saw a car, I saw a Grady in 1953. So autocorrelation function. What's the best match that shows up? And he would nail it every time. I'm going to end, because I'm running a little bit late, by talking about, just briefly about the DeSanctis part thing I want to say is that this is not a billable note for you guys. Your Epic machines would go crazy. But I want you to read this later, because this is a note he sent me on a patient I referred to him. And I would challenge anyone to say this. I've never seen a note that was more patient detailed and illustrative of how a patient's history played into their care, both in the hospital and out of the hospital, and what this note says. For example, just briefly, his father died at age 65 of pneumonia. Mr. So-and-so was born in Poland. You know what country your patient's born in? 3 children, ages 49, 45, 42, and 7 grandchildren. You know how many grandchildren your patients have? He used to smoke cigars, but doesn't do it. Alcohol has not taken off. Very active. Wholesale furniture sales. Travels to Caribbean, Canada. Carries a 45-pound bag with him on his road selling. That tells you his functional status for a 78-year-old guy is functional class what? 1. Okay? We go for it. So I want you to pay attention to the fact that, the phenotype of a committed professional clinician, these are my notes to myself, really involve what we've talked about, committing your time in the hospital, reading about your patients, calling your patients, bringing them good and bad news, being the CME for your referring doctors. If you do all of that stuff with the Emory education, you're going to be at least with a good doctor. Dr. Hurst says what a good doctor's trying to do, there's always a work in progress, right? This is what you try to do. And then what he has on the wall of the, that you have there at Emory says it all. On the internal medicine residency, the quote, "The practice of medicine is a predominantly humanistic act. Physicians must care about their patients and must constantly improve their scientific knowledge of disease." Once again, to care and know is dangerous, and not know is dangerous. To know and not care is even worse. So caring and knowing has to be 50-50. Well, I hope this is helpful for you guys. I got a little late start. Share with you a lot of things on the journey of my medical career that mostly have come from the times of walking these walls, these halls here, maybe the walls too, the halls here, both at Grady and Emory at Crawford Law and the VA, and keeping a listening ear out to great ideas and teaching points made by these great teachers here. So I hope you do that, and thank you all for taking time to listen to this.